My name is Father Thomas Steinke, and I'm currently serving at St. Anthony of Padua Parish in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Today is the 10th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and I'm going to be talking about the tactics of the devil. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus came home with his disciples. Again the crowd gathered, making it impossible for them even to eat. When his relatives heard of this, they set out to seize him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." The scribes who had come from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebul, and by the prince of demons he drives out demons." Summoning them, he began to speak to them in parables. "How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand. That is the end of him. But no one can enter a strong man's house to plunder his property unless he first ties up the strong man. Then he can plunder the house. Amen, I say to you, all sins and all blasphemies that people utter will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an everlasting sin. For they had said, 'He has an unclean spirit.' His mother and his brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent word to him and called him. A crowd around him told him, 'Your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you.' But he said to them in reply, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking around at those seated in the circle, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother.'" The Gospel of the Lord. In today's first reading, we have the fall of man. Adam and Eve, tempted by the devil, disobeyed God. The consequences of original sin are passed down to all their descendants, including you and I. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says that because of original sin, man is now subject to ignorance and has an inclination of evil that is called concupiscence. Another consequence is that the devil has acquired a certain domination over man, even though man remains free. Today I want to talk about how Satan has taken advantage of our weakened intellect by deceiving us in many ways. Even the most basic common sense teachings of the Bible, amazingly, is now being called into question. Father Gabriel Amorth was the chief exorcist of the Diocese of Rome from 1985 until his death in September 2016. Commenting on the fall in Genesis, he says that the serpent lied to them when he said, "You will not die," because after they disobeyed, they were now subject to suffering and death. He said that he acts in the same way with us when he makes us doubt the existence of sin and hell, in paradise, and of their eternity. It seems to me that the vast majority of the world either doesn't believe in hell, or if they do, they don't believe that disobeying Catholic teaching on faith and morals leads to the second death, that is, eternal separation from God. Even some prominent theologians propose that maybe hell is empty. Sometimes I think that people have a better chance of getting to heaven if one emphasizes that 15 doctors of the church, 15 of them, are of the opinion that most people don't make it to heaven. Or the vision of St. Faustina's broad road leading to hell and narrow road leading to heaven, which seems to mirror the words of Jesus Christ in the Gospel. Father Amorth says that another tactic of the devil is to make evil appear good. The serpent tells Adam and Eve that God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Commenting on this passage, Amorth says that the devil makes evil appear interesting, positive, and beautiful. Hence, euthanasia is called mercy killing. That is, you are helping someone avoid unnecessary suffering. Let's just forget about the killing part. Abortion is viewed as a human rights issue for a woman. She can do whatever she wants with her body. Never mind that the embryo is not a body part. That's just a technicality. Well, one that's really popular today is you can have sexual relations with anybody as long as nobody gets hurt, ignoring the fact that people do get hurt. Infidelities, STDs, unwed mothers, abortion, shortened lifespan, emptiness after loveless sexual encounters. In today's first reading, Eve said, "The serpent tricked me." Well, he's tricking a high percentage of Americans in our day. Indeed, 94% of adults admit to having sex outside of marriage, and 91% find contraception morally acceptable. These are actions that the church teaches are intrinsically evil, and the Catholic Church teaches infallibly on matters of faith and morals. So if the church teaches something is gravely sinful and it could lead to eternal damnation, it would be wise to avoid that particular sin. We have a situation where practically nobody fears God anymore. In fact, in her vision of the souls existing in hell, one of the things that struck St. Faustina was that, quotes, "Most of the souls there are those who disbelieve that there is a hell." In this respect, I think the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Finally, Amos says that Satan wants you to think you should be free to do whatever you want. Many people believe in a type of radical existential freedom a la Sartre, where the individual has the ability to define him or himself or herself in the most fundamental ways, even ontologically, so that their choices essentially determine what kind of being they are. Nowhere is this more pronounced in the transgender rights movement. If a biological man or boy feels that he's a woman or wants to be a woman, so be it. In order to do that, transgender men and women are often encouraged to receive hormone therapy, replacing the hormones that naturally occur in the body with those of the opposite sex before they reach the age of puberty. Generally speaking, they will say something like, "I have a boy brain, but a girl body." The problem is that this is not true. Modern science confirms that men and women form different brains based on their chromosomal makeup. There are two books, one entitled The Male Brain and the other The Female Brain. Neither book mentions God except for a couple casual, irreverent uses of God's name. The author says that studies show that there are deep differences at the level of every cell between the male and female brain. A male cell has a Y chromosome and a female does not. That small but significant difference begins to play out early in the brain as the genes set out for later amplification by hormones. Over the course of a man's life, the brain will be formed and reformed according to a blueprint drafted by genes and male sex hormones. And this male brain biology produces his distinctly male behaviors. The author then goes on to describe the changes in the female brain through the various stages of life, which all differ from the male brain at the same age. For instance, I was fascinated that a woman develops what she calls a mommy brain. With the birth of her child, she literally falls in love with the child, something that, quotes, looks a lot like romantic love on a brain scan. In both types of love, she says, surges of dopamine and oxytocin in the brain create the bond, switching on pleasure circuits that produce feelings of exhilaration and attachment. Finally, a physiological explanation for the seemingly inexplicable intense love mothers develop for their babies after childbirth. God made them that way. We are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made. The author concludes that, quotes, in the 1970s at the University of California, Berkeley, the buzzword among young women was mandatory unisex, which meant that it was politically incorrect even to mention sex difference. The biological reality, however, is that there is no unisex brain. Pretending that women and men are the same while doing a disservice to both men and women ultimately hurts women. These biological truths have become a powerful stimulus for the reconsideration of a woman's social contract. In writing this book, I have struggled with two voices in my head. One is the scientific truth, and the other is political correctness. I have chosen to emphasize scientific truth over political correctness, even though scientific truths may not always be welcome. And scientific truth can never go against the gospel because both have the same author. Pope Francis is an outspoken opponent of gender ideology, calling it a global war to destroy marriage. Cardinal Robert Sarah, the former prefect for the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, even used stronger language in May 2016 at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C., describing gender ideology as demonic on multiple occasions. We are either male or female persons, and nothing can change that. A person can mutilate his or her body but cannot change his or her sex. Many physicians and therapists from across the political spectrum are critical of affirming children as transgender and the use of puberty blockers. The conclusion of the American College of Pediatricians as of June 2017 is the treatment of gender dysphoria in childhood with hormones effectively amounts to mass experimentation on and sterilization of youth who are cognitively incapable of providing informed consent. There is a serious ethical issue with allowing irreversible, life-changing procedures to be performed on minors who are too young to give valid consent themselves. Adolescents cannot understand the magnitude of such decisions. Ethics alone demands an end to this practice. So there's a reason that, according to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, 46% of trans men and 42% of trans women have attempted suicide. In a study by the mental health charity PACE, which surveyed 2,000 young people with gender issues, 48% attempted suicide, 58% self-harm. Another landmark study in sexually liberal Sweden shows that people who identify as transgender and have had sex reassignment surgery have a risk of death by suicide 19 times higher than the general population. For biological males to take female hormones such as estrogen, or biological females to take a male hormone such as testosterone, there are major health risks. Males taking female hormones have an increased risk of fatal blood clots, breast cancer, coronary artery disease, to name a few. Females taking male hormones are at an increased risk of severe liver dysfunction, coronary artery disease, hypertension, breast and uterine cancer. Psychologist Graciela Balestra, who works closely with the transgender community, says that, quotes, transgender people have an average life expectancy of about 30 to 32 years. Moreover, at least 70% of people with gender dysphoria suffer from mental illness. Jazz Jennings began transitioning from male to female at age 5. She's the poster boy, so to say, for the transgender movement. She's a YouTube personality and has a reality TV series. What many people don't know is that Jazz Jennings has always struggled with depression, and Jazz and her mother openly talk about it. Even worse is the case of Nancy Verhulst. Tormented as a child because her parents did not want a girl, she elected to have surgery to become a man and changed her name to Nathan. After the operation, she says, I've discussed it with myself. I don't want to be a monster. Living in Belgium, where assisted suicide is legal, she opted for assisted suicide, citing unbearable psychological suffering as the cause. Transgender people who attempt to surgically alter their sex are attempting to do something unnatural. That is not the way God intended it, and this is always self-destructive. Unnatural behavior and self-destruction go hand in hand. It's no wonder that if left untreated, 90% of children with gender dysphoria will have the problem resolved and go through normal development. This homily is certainly not politically correct because I am trying to say some things that are always morally wrong. And I think they are obviously wrong. And yet I could walk outside after Mass and someone will say I'm being judgmental or that I'm being intolerant. The definition of tolerance is to accept the viewpoint of others. I've given very compelling reasons why I think affirming a transgender child is morally wrong. I feel strongly about it. The facts certainly seem to be in my favor. If you give a young child hormones of the opposite sex to try to change his or her nature, he or she will most certainly be depressed, even suicidal, and die very young. People sometimes say, why does the church hate transgender people? In truth, Christians love transgender people. To love is to will what is good for the other. The Catholic faith is a route to happiness, and trying to change your God-given sex will always lead to self-destruction. God really did create man, male, and female. We have to protect the most basic teaching in the Bible. One time I was debating about whether to give a, quotes, politically incorrect homily, even though I knew what I was saying was true and many people were being hurt psychologically, spiritually, and even physically by believing otherwise. One of our lectors said, Father, if you don't talk about these things, who will? I pose that question to you. If Catholics don't speak out, who will?
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed hearing the gospel and homily, I invite you to share it with someone you know who may also find it rewarding, and also to subscribe to the Catholic Voice channel. Please see in the description below if you would like to receive a text message for each daily gospel and homily. Please also keep our missionary priests throughout the world in your prayers. Thank you, and God bless.